Okay, welcome everyone to our fourth session. We have one more session left, and today's session is in regard to out of the trunk and into the driver's seat. And today we have our presenter, Nicole Weyer, and she will be doing everything with us today. Excuse me. So, Nicole, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks so much, Tasha. Thank you to everyone who has joined us this afternoon. I know sometimes people might be coming in a little bit late. Whenever you arrive, let that be okay. We're going to be together for about the next 55 minutes. And some of you may have signed up because you saw the title and you thought, what in the world is this woman going to talk about? And the title might not be as revealing. Our topic today in this fourth installment of the Strong and Resilient Women's series is really about identifying some of the things that have been well beyond our control in 2020, and also starting to identify the things that are within our control. I know for some of us, myself included, the arrival of COVID, the arrival of shelter-in-place orders, certainly one of the things that I kept coming back to how I was feeling was I've been the person who's been a decision maker, both personally and professionally, and this whole experience with COVID felt as though COVID sort of came down, plucked me out of the driver's seat in my car, and promptly put me either in the trunk or into a child's seat in the very back of my car. And what I know is 2020 is extraordinary. It has been from its beginning in January, and I'm confident it will be extraordinary as we work through the second half of our year. So I'm so excited to be here today and to be able to engage in a conversation and have us start to talk about what are the things that are beyond our control? How does that feel? How does that show up for us? And then also for us to shift into this place of what are some of the things that I actually can control? So I'm going to thank Tasha in advance. She's going to be the person behind some of the slides today. There will be a few of those that come in, and she's going to share her screen and put up our first one to really kick us off on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon. So as that first slide comes up, here it comes. One of the things that I want to ask, and if people have their video on, they're welcome to do that. Or if you don't, that's okay too. But here's my question. Anyone in this room like to be in control? Raise your hand. Put a yes in the chat if you're someone who likes to be in control of different parts of your life, likes to be the person who is making decisions, is comfortable in that role. Yes. Thank you. I am glad to know that I am not alone. So today, this is about a conversation that we're going to have. And this conversation goes really well when we're also all participating. So use this chat. If something that I say hits home and you're like, holy cow, that's me, put that in the chat. If you have a question, put that in the chat as well. Because Tasha is being the tech guru on this and kind of running the slides, I'm able to see that, and I'm happy to answer questions as we go along. So we're going to go to the next slide, which is in some ways, honestly indicative of 2020. And if we were going into a restaurant, it's almost as though the server will come up to you and say, are you interested in chaos and uncertainty today? And for many of us, on any given day, our answer might be no. And that's absolutely perfect. And that's exactly where we can be. So here's a question. Did COVID throw you for a loop? Raise your hand or drop a yes in the chat. Were you anticipating in January that 2020 would in fact throw your life into this state of prolonged uncertainty, chaos, shelter in place, mask wearing, physical and social distancing, right? Yeah. If it's our choice, likely we're not going to order a double helping of chaos and uncertainty. And if we do, we're sure not going to order it every day for 6 or 7 months. So one of the things that I want to start off with is, and this is a place for you guys to just type away, and even if you want to come off and off mute and just chime in, you're welcome to do that too. Let's start a running list. What are some of the things this year that have been completely beyond your control? Just 100% outside of your realm of being able to make a decision about, being able to choose. Childcare, yes, right? Childcare and what that looks like. Freedom, absolutely. Your health, okay. What else has felt like it's been this thing totally beyond your control? Thank you, Susan. Kids at home. This whole idea of your house suddenly becoming the classroom, the study space, maybe even the principal's office, transformation of our living spaces, right? Who ever thought that in 2020, parents would be in the role of also teacher and educator, if that's not your profession? Yep. Multiple people trying to work from home, totally beyond our control, right? Would anyone have imagined that we would find ourselves in a position where governors and Congress and the President of the United States said to people, you need to stay home for at least 2 weeks, right? You need to stay home and we need to take our space. So many things showed up in 2020, and it was this powerful message of, if you think you're in control, there's this larger things that can happen that swiftly shift that dynamic. And so one of the things, Tasha's going to drop into the chat an article. We're going to be dropping in a couple articles with some live links to them throughout this session. What I would encourage you to do is just to click on them. Again, they're live links, and then you can bookmark them or just leave them in your browser. But as we look at this extraordinary time, chaos, uncertainty, shelter in place, endless lists of open questions to which we do not have a response. Finding ways to protect and nourish our spirit is more important than ever. So the link that Tasha just put in is a short article that I found quite insightful and helpful. So we've started to build this list, all these things that are beyond our control. And as we move to the next slide, we're going to step into this conversation that talks about some of the common responses to things that are way outside of our control, especially for those of us, myself included, who typically find themselves in the driver's seat, who are typically leading and making decisions and setting and creating the plans. So I want to see, Lucy just put in a question about the sound. How is my sound here? Can folks hear me, or is it a little bit jumbled?
I can hear you.
Okay. Just checking, because I can do earbuds if it seems, okay, it looks like we're doing pretty well. Lucy, I think you might be right on that it could be some of the internet connection. So a common response to uncertainty that seems to be prevalent, that seems to be surrounding us. A common response is for us to buy into how we think we are supposed to function, right? What are those expectations? Real, attainable, who knows? But oftentimes when we are in crisis, when crisis surrounds us, when emergency surrounds us, when we are surrounded by things that are urgent, or in fact, these things that are well beyond our control, we can go to this place of the comparison game. They seem to be managing it well. They seem really calm. We get all of these messages, and we're going to talk about where some of them come from, about how we are supposed to function. Does this resonate for anybody when you reflect back to maybe March and April, when we were early in the shelter in place, right? You had some folks who felt like everything was really normal and they were able to just make it look seamless, right? make it appear that there might not be an impact on their personal or professional lives. So Brené Brown, one of my very favorite authors, says this: authenticity is the daily practice of letting go who we think we are supposed to be and embracing who we are. And when we think back to COVID, when we think back to the earlier stages of this, and even as we got to April and May and June, and even last month, have there been those moments where you have felt, I love Janice says, felt like a hot mess? Yeah, where it's felt as though everything is crumbling. And maybe you've engaged in that comparison game and you've looked around and it may have felt like everyone around me seems to be managing well and I am a puddle. I am a bucket full of stress. I am completely living in a place of overwhelm. I'm not really sure how I'm supposed to move forward. If any of those thoughts were true for you, put a yes or a thumbs up in the chat. Because they're certainly prevalent responses, prevalent emotions, and completely natural. And the best way for us to start to move into a place of identifying what we can control is for us to remember that we are simply human and that there are going to be challenges. And for us to remember that none of us has ever had this experience before. None of us have lived through a global pandemic. None of us have had this type of triggering, out of control, mysterious, no real answers about it situation cross our paths before. I love what Lynn said. Yes, it's difficult, and because you're the CEO, you have to be calm and set the pace so the staff don't freak out. Yes. And for anyone else in this room that's leading an organization, how was that for you? Were you able to start to compartmentalize, put some of the stress, put some of the questions, put some of the holy cow, I can't believe I'm here to the side, and show up for your team and show up for your organization? So here's another question for all of you today. When Brené Brown talks about authenticity and it's about embracing who we are, has there been an opportunity for you to bring your authentic self into your workplace in the past 6 months? Have you given yourself permission to show up just as you are? And that might not be as polished as you were last year at this time, right? So here's the question. When we feel as though so many things are beyond our control, how does that uncertainty and some of that fear show up in your physical body? I think mentally and emotionally, we can absolutely say, I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed, and we know what it is. How does it show up, this feeling as though you're on your heels, feeling as though you do not have control? How does that show up in your physical body? Might it show up in your mood? Might you have less patience than you typically did before? Might it show up in your sleep? Might it show up in getting to bed at a reasonable hour, that alarm clock goes off in the morning, and your first thought is, I am not getting out of bed. I do not have the energy to get up. All right, no, definitely snapping at people. Minor injuries because we're rushing, absolutely. Stress eating, absolutely. And the anxiety starts to bubble, right? We look for ways to soothe. We look for ways to try to take back some of that control. Here's the most important piece that helps us shift from being on our heels to engaging in a thoughtful and authentic and profound proactive way. giving yourself permission to release the idea of how you are supposed to be managing and functioning through COVID. Releasing the idea that there's only one or a specific way that you should be leading and supporting your colleagues and showing up in your personal and professional life. We set aside that comparison game, we set aside that ruler, and we start measuring ourselves against ourselves. We become our own ruler. Because here's the truth, there's not another person on this planet that's exactly like you. You are bringing your own talent and gift and vision and passion and skills and places to grow, and there's only one you. So if you stifle yourself with playing that game of meeting expectations that are mostly unattainable, everyone else in your life loses the opportunity to be in relationship with who you really are. So we're going to move to the next slide and continue to talk a little bit about another common response to crisis and uncertainty that swirls all around us. And it can be for this huge pendulum swing, right? If we are team leaders or leaders of our organizations, or whatever our world looks like personally and professionally, here's my question. How many of you had the pendulum swing and you started working more hours when shelter in place started? If this is you, if that pendulum swung from, I was already working a ton of hours, how many of you increased your hours when COVID set in? How many of you went into this working beyond overtime? How many of you felt this need to save your organization, to save your team? Is it possible that the extra hours were an effort to retain clients, were an effort to navigate uncertainty? But when things are beyond our control, what's one of our major go-tos? In our mind, it's let me work more because it's something that I can control. I might not love it, but it's something that I can control. I may know deep down that now an 80, 90, 100-hour week really means that I'm shortchanging myself and my family and my faith community and my neighbors, but I might do it anyway, right? Human nature tells us when things are swirling around us, we grasp onto something that is tangible that brings us back into a place of control. I love what Susan says that about her hours were about the same a lot when you own your own business. Absolutely. And I think for a lot of us entrepreneurs, one of the things that happened is there was even more blurred lines between my work life and my non-work life, right? And that goes to all of a sudden, our homes were not just our living spaces. And maybe our home office became, again, the boardroom, the office, the classroom, maybe the principal's office, maybe the recreation space, maybe the home theater, maybe the gym. So without judging ourselves and without letting that inner critic show up and say, what are you doing? We go into this place of what can I control? Here's the tough question though. And if you have been with me through any of these other sessions, I believe in some of these radical honesty moment and radical honesty questions. And here's one for today. When your hours increased and your work week increased by half, maybe doubled, maybe even more, what was the quality of the time that you were investing? What was the quality of your presence for your team members? What was the quality of the work that you were producing? It's a hard question to answer. It means taking a really deep breath in and starting to join those dots of, does more hours mean that I'm still able to serve my clients, serve my team, serve my board, serve my organization in the same way? I am a big fan of Arianna Huffington, and one of the things that she says is this: we think mistakenly that success is the result of the amount of time we put in at work, instead of the quality of the time we put in. That's a hard one to wrap your head around at times. Yep. It's a deep reflective moment to be able to say, I was working all those hours. Did that move my business forward? Did I have the same level of creativity? Was my innovation the same or even higher? How was I able to show up? Because now suddenly the hours that I'm clocking have shifted. I love Lynn's comment about you found that others feeling the same way was really helpful and validating. Absolutely. And isn't it amazing that when we step into this place of honesty and vulnerability about how we're feeling, whether or not it is life is happening to me and I have absolutely no opportunity for choice, that we can not only give grace to others, but it can also be an opportunity for us to give grace to ourselves. So we are going to go to the next slide, and this is going to be our first opportunity today to actually go into a breakout group. Tasha is going to put us in breakout rooms, and each person is going to have an opportunity to respond to these couple bullets about a minute each. And what will be important is for one person in the room to make sure that you're a timekeeper, but it's a time for us to start creating our community here this afternoon. What's your name? What do you do? What's your business? What's your passion? And then honestly, share 2 things that have been beyond your control, and those things that make you just a little bit irritated and a little bit twitchy because you know that they're beyond your control and you wish that were not the case. So we're going to go into breakout rooms. We're going to be in groups of 3. We're each going to have 1 minute to respond. Definitely have somebody be a timekeeper, and I'm going to see you right back here in just a couple minutes. You may want to take a screenshot of this just to remember kind of what we're all going to be sharing. And I will see you very soon.
Are we reintegrated? Okay.
Yes, we all bounced back in.
Okay.
So how was that breakout session? How was that quick chat for people? Did you learn a little bit about another person maybe? And maybe
that was fun.
Other people?
Yeah, that was fun.
It is too short.
Quick.
Yeah, like it's so quick because we start to actually find some of that common ground of, oh my goodness, I'm not the only person who finds this incredibly challenging, and suddenly instead of getting plunked out of the driver's seat, we're plunked back into a main session. Absolutely, I am with you. So Tasha's going to advance our slide, and my question to all of you is, are you ready to move? Are you ready to serve an eviction notice, to being on your heels, break out of the trunk, break out of the child seat that it feels like COVID may have put us in, and reclaim your place as decision maker, as leader, as team member, as colleague, as responsible, authentic adult with agency? And I think that's the place where we're now going to focus, because many of us have been in this everything is happening to me, and it's now time for us to say, I'm about to start driving, and what does that look like? And I'm going to share another thought from Arianna Huffington as we jump into this part of our conversation. And she says this: don't just climb the ladder of success, a ladder that leads, after all, to higher and higher levels of stress and burnout, but chart a new path to success, remaking it in a way that includes not just the conventional metrics of money and power, but in fact, a third metric that involves well-being, wisdom, wonder, and giving, so that the goal is not just to succeed, but to thrive. So as we start to think about and consider, what are the things that are within our control? Tasha dropped in another link to an article that's a really interesting perspective, regardless of your role in an organization, that can offer some really good insight into this. But let me offer you this. Along the lines of what Huffington says, can we put in this third metric about, can we be leading, can we be succeeding if we're sharing wisdom? Can a place where you start to take back control, step into a place of empowerment, be thinking about and considering this question every day? What wisdom can I share with others? I'm not talking about jumping on a soapbox and pontificating and lecturing. I am talking about, what is some wisdom that I have about this organization, about this process, about how I am navigating this unbelievable experience that I can share with other people. Because if we go back to what some of the comments have already said and shared so beautifully, when we started to really engage with other people about how we were really feeling, it allowed for an opportunity to grant grace. And through grace and compassion comes understanding and transformation. So I would love for you to put into the chat, what is some wisdom that you can share with your colleagues in this realm of your personal or professional life? And again, this is not lecturing. It's not telling someone what to do or how to manage, but it's what is an experience that you can share that might help deepen a relationship. Move a connection from a place of stuck and maybe tension into a place of renewed dialogue. So in tandem with wisdom that we can share that helps us shift our locus of control back into ourselves, it's also this question of, how can you prioritize your well-being? Another sometimes tough question to answer. I think especially, honestly, for women, we have received so many messages about we have to care for everybody else and everybody else is the priority and everyone and everything else comes before we do. But in fact, ask yourself this: if I prioritize my well-being, what kind of an example can that serve to everyone else in my life? Can that impact how I lead? Can that have an impact on the productivity and the creativity and the innovation and the collaboration within my organization? Because when we start to prioritize how we are feeling and honoring ourselves, it's a powerful message that we're sending to everyone else around us. Personal life, community life, spiritual life, and professional life. So wisdom to share, these are coming in and they are beautiful. Think and act long-term. Oh my goodness, yes. Playing that long game, right? That also helps us to regain some control instead of living in the crisis, the moment-to-moment crisis and uncertainty. That Janice says that I need you to really hear me, and we need to be able to have those difficult conversations in a respectful way. Now, wouldn't it be amazing if we had examples of that coming from across our country and from all of our elected offices, right? Let's have the difficult conversations, but let's do it from this place of civility and respect. That would be transformational. I love what Sharon says, at the end of the day, leave it at the office. And wow, how hard is that when home is work and work is home and everything's kind of jumbled? Absolutely. And Lucy is going to God for guidance. Absolutely. And we can focus on grace and blessings. Because when we do that, when those are the places that we're coming from, again, the message that we are sending to everyone in our organization is completely different than when we are panicked, than when we are in reaction mode, than when we are feeling like it is a Chicken Little moment every single day. So here's another way that we can start to identify things that we can control and places where we can start to bring that locus of control back into ourselves. This can sometimes be a hard one. It's definitely a hard one for me, and it's definitely a daily practice. Approaching with wonder and curiosity some of the uncertainty that shows up. And the fact that there are times when I feel incredibly out of control, and that everything is happening to me, and that I am driving very few things. How can I approach that and just say, it's kind of fascinating that I'm here again. That this seems to be a lesson that I have yet to learn. What can be a challenge is when things feel very outside of us, is for that inner critic and our inner dialogue to start to just churn. How many of you have an inner dialogue that can be a little bit biting towards yourself, right? That can be full of all those value judgments. You should be able to, if you were successful, complete the sentence. You should be able to manage this with grace and ease. Really? No one's ever done this before. So if we can, in those moments of stress and struggle, and when challenge shows up, approach it with wonder and curiosity. I had no idea that this was going to be so difficult for me. I wonder how I can try to resolve it. I'm kind of curious how this just happened. And we can start to shift our mindset, which gets us into the last one, which is incredibly important. I was in a training session yesterday, and one of the speakers gave this beautiful definition of reacting, and I went, yes. And here's what she said. A reaction is response without thought. So when things are beyond our control, is your go-to to react to it and to just go on autopilot and whatever happens, happens? Or can you thoughtfully respond? Can you pause for a moment, take a look around, and come from a place of what might move me forward? Reaction feels different than a response. Reaction shows up differently in our body and in our parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system than when we give ourselves a chance to catch our breath and respond. So if you are someone who is in reaction mode, some of those tend to be highly emotional, some of them tend to be a little bit abrupt. Some of those reactions tend to not bring people together and have the communication work, but create a little bit of this, or create the communication where it's really not coming together. Perhaps one of the things to consider is, how can I just take a pause for a moment? How can I ask for a couple minutes or a moment to collect my thoughts before re-engaging in the conversation? Most often, our reactions don't get us to where we want to go. That's the rub, and sometimes that's really the hard part. So what Brene Brown also says is, when you can't control what's happening, challenge yourself to control the way you respond to what is happening. That's where the power is. We bring that control back into ourselves when we step away from control what's happening in that moment, and we step into, how will I respond? How can I respond? How can I identify options in how I respond? I love what Lynn said. I sleep on things and see clearer in the morning. Absolutely. You give yourself time and space to mull it over, to let some ideas percolate, to have an opportunity to reflect on the conversation or the question or the demand or whatever it is that has crossed your path. That pause is powerful, and it can change a partnership. It can grow a relationship. It can transform the work that needs to be done. So we're going to go to our next slide. And that's going to take us into a place of, should be our next breakout group. And we're going to jump back into, we're going to jump back into groups of 3. And this is really an opportunity for us to start to think about, what are 2 things that I actually can control? And not just things that I might do someday, but what are 2 things that I can control, and how do I want to start taking action today? Because I think sometimes a challenge with different workshops and webinars is it becomes this heady thing and we don't translate it into action. And when that's the case, we stay where we are. And this whole series is about getting us off of our heels, onto our toes and onto our feet, and moving forward. So we're going to go into groups, and I'm going to give you a really easy example. One thing that I can control is the amount of sleep that I get. An action that I can take is to actually divorce myself from these devices, tablets and phones and electronics, 60 minutes before bed. If I know that I need better and more sleep, the action that I'm going to take is, hour before I climb into bed, all those electronics go off. There's no more screen time. Let me give you another example. One of the things that I can control is how much movement I get each day. And an action that I can take is, I'm going to build into my schedule and actually put on my calendar a 15-minute walk in the morning to start my day. Before breakfast, before coffee, before anything. 15 minutes of walking, just to move my body, wake up my body, give myself an opportunity to be physically present. So if you want to take a screenshot of what we're going to be responding to, Tasha is going to work her magic once again and put us into groups. And I will see you back here in 3 minutes. Oh my goodness. I find these times so incredibly short. Karen was like halfway through her thought. I want you to finish your sentence. My goodness.
Everyone is back now.
What I love about these conversations is it's also an opportunity for us to start to just reflect, and an opportunity to pause and say, what are some places where I can start to make a shift in feeling like some of that control comes back internally to me. I love that. Thank you so much for everyone for being in those groups today, even though I know it's a really short period of time. So we're going to go to our next slide, and we have just a couple minutes left, and we're going to be finishing almost right on time. So another way that we can start to not only identify what we can control, but also to start to take back that control and put it back within us and internalize it and serve an eviction notice to all these things that have pulled it away from us is really with our mindset. And Carol Dweck has done revolutionary work on mindset. If you have not read her book, Mindset is powerful. And she talks a lot about the difference between a growth and a fixed mindset. And what that really comes down to is the lens through which we see so much of our lives. And are we coming from this place of there is not enough, and a place of scarcity where whatever I have, I must covet, where everything that I have to learn, I have already learned, where I am a finished product? Or can we come from this place of, and look through this lens of abundance, through this place of there is enough for everyone? Can we come from this place of I am constantly learning and I am growing all the time and I am not yet a finished product? That thinking alone really helps us figure out and gives us a lens through which to look at how we have experienced COVID. Has this consistently been something that is happening to you? Or is this also a time of incredible transformation for every single person to be able to say, what was that like for me? What did I learn? And here's an incredibly important thing as well, is how we are talking about COVID and the power of our language. When our language is constantly catastrophizing, that's where our mind goes. When our language is constantly about the fact that it's a COVID health crisis, it's a public health crisis, it's a global state of emergency. Our language has power. Our language not only impacts our mindset, we internalize the power of those words. And if you've been with me for any of these, and you may have noticed just today, when I talk about 2020 and I talk about COVID, I talk about it as a pretty extraordinary time. And extraordinary can have a whole lot of meanings. Extraordinary can be, wow, fantastic. And extraordinary can be, holy cow, what in the world just happened? But I stay away from some of that catastrophizing language. Because if we're constantly hearing about crisis and emergency and we don't have any answers and it's traveling around the world, and a lot of this highly emotional language, we internalize that. That drives whether or not we can react or respond. It drives whether or not our physical body can slow down and actually digest food or not. That catastrophizing, powerfully, highly emotional language and the way that we internalize it impacts our ability to slow down and actually sleep restfully. The mind-body connection is incredibly powerful. And here's one of the things I know to be true. Where our mind goes, our energy flows. If your conversations are all about a crisis and an emergency, that's where your energy goes. And that takes up space. So your energy to be thoughtful, supportive, compassionate, visionary, creative, and innovative is diminished. Because there's not space for all of it. So this is an opportunity for us to be discerning and say, I need to tune into how I'm talking about this. Because when I'm engaged in a conversation and we're talking about a crisis and everything feels as though it is a Chicken Little moment, here's what happens to my emotions. Here's what happens to my stress. Here's what I'm carrying forward. I have an upset stomach. I've got muscle knots throughout my body. I can't sleep. I'm really crabby. So our first step in taking back our control is simply just to notice. And to notice and say, and to notice the language that others around us are using. And to feel empowered to have a conversation that says, can we just talk about how, like, the language and the adjectives and how we're describing this whole experience? I wonder what it would feel like if we swiped out the word crisis and put in a new one. What would you use to describe it? Simple mindset shift, really easy tool that can take us from this place of everything happening to us to this place of, I get to decide and I get to drive how I want to respond, how I want to feel, and what this looks like. So Tasha dropped into the chat a really helpful article about changing the way that we talk about COVID and how that can really help our mental health. I think it's a really insightful article. I would encourage you to click on that and then either read it or bookmark it. So we are going to go to our final slide today. And this is an opportunity, if anyone would like to drop into the chat or unmute yourself. What was something that was helpful from today's conversation? Is there an insight or a takeaway or an opportunity where you got to join the dots that you would want to share? And you can put that into the chat or unmute yourself and just add that here. Perhaps for you, this conversation got you thinking about, wow, there might be something that I really want to start to pay attention to. I am by trade not only an entrepreneur, but part of that is I'm a burnout prevention coach, and my work is focused around empowering men and women who are flirting with burnout to learn how to nourish themselves so they are leading in all areas of their lives. And if you're interested in learning more about that or in joining my community, Tasha dropped in a bit.ly for us to be able to stay connected and for you to be able to have a conversation with me, receive my newsletter, or even just learn a little bit more about what I do. What I will say is next week, week 5, holy cow, we are wrapping up this series. And it's really going to be a culmination of many of these conversations that we've had over the past 4 weeks. Our focus is going to be on how do we create our new next? Because it is not about going back to where we were, because this has been a transformational experience for every person on our planet. So it's not about what do I want to go back to? It's about what do I want to create next? So some of that conversation is going to focus on what our goals are, on how we are leading in our organizations or leading our families or leading in our community. Because again, so much wisdom, so much information and data has been gathered over the past 6 months, and we're not going to miss the opportunity to translate it into a path forward for all of us. So I thank you so much for being here today. I thank you so much for your engagement and your participation. I hope to see you next week. And I want to leave you with a thought from another one of my favorite female leaders, Sheryl Sandberg. And here's what she says. Build resilience in yourselves. When tragedy or disappointment strike, know that you have the ability to get through absolutely anything. I promise you do. As the saying goes, we are more vulnerable than we ever thought, but we are stronger than we ever imagined. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your week. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other.
Thank you, everyone. And we'll